Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for August 27th, 2021. And on this episode, I've got two quotes each from Thomas Paine, John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, with their views on the horrors and evils of war. Not on the structure of war powers under the Constitution this time, but really as a deeper philosophical foundation. I'm going to do my very best to keep my own personal commentary on this really short and just let their words do the talking because it's so important. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. There you're going to find all the archives of the show, individual episodes. I link to the stuff that I reference in the episode so you can read and learn more on your own time. Today I've got a bunch of original source documents. You can find all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we have a bunch of video platforms and then audio-only podcast editions. And then, of course, you can find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. And we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. Again, the show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get these quotes and this info out to you in the next 10 to 15-ish minutes. And before getting into these heavyweight founders, these leading thinkers of the time, I want to start out with two people who had an incredible amount of influence on the thought of the founders, on their principles, on the views of individual liberty, on the revolution itself. First of all, to someone called Montesquieu. You may have heard the name. Montesquieu was so influential in the founding generation, cited so often in their papers, speeches, and things like that, that someone did a study a while back, and it may not be, I don't know the accuracy of it, but it's a lot. They found that Montesquieu was the number two most cited book by the founding generation, number two only to the Bible. So that should say a lot, at least for the time there. And here from his The Spirit of the Laws, a book written or published in 1750, I think he passed away a few years after that, and he put it this way: the spirit of monarchy is war and enlargement of dominion. Peace and moderation is the spirit of a republic. So when the founding generation was leaving or fighting to get away from the monarchies of the past and set up a system for an advance of liberty in the future, this was in the back of their minds, if not right on the front burner. And here's another one that was very, very influential: Cato's Letters, written in the early 1720s by John Trenchard and I believe Thomas Gordon. They co-authored. And this one was Cato number 87, written July of 1722 by Trenchard. And he put it this way: war is comprehensive of most, if not all, the mischiefs which do or ever can afflict men. It depopulates nations, lays waste the finest countries, destroys arts, sciences, and learning, butchers innocence, ruins the best men, and advances the worst. War, he writes, effaces every trace of virtue, piety, and compassion, and introduces confusion, anarchy, and all kinds of corruption in public affairs. War, indeed, is pregnant with so many evils that it ought ever to be avoided when it can be avoided. Now, this wasn't a pure anti-war in every situation. It wasn't a pacifist view, but it certainly was. War really had to be a last resort, not a kind of politician type of a last resort, but really don't go into it unless it is absolutely 100% necessary. And I think Thomas Paine, with the first of these quotes, Thomas Paine really had this view in mind when he was writing The American Crisis #1. December 23rd, 1776, things weren't going really hot for the resistance, for the freedom fighters, and he put it this way: not all the treasures of the world could have induced me to support an offensive war, for I think it murder. But if a thief breaks into my house, burns and destroys my property, and kills or threatens to kill me or those who are in it, and to bind me in all cases whatsoever to his absolute will, Am I to suffer it? And Paine continued with that same type of view, and I'm not sure if this is American Crisis number 4 or number 5, but this was in early March 1778. He says, if there is a sin superior to every other, it is that of willful and offensive war. And Paine goes on, says, he who is the author of a war lets loose the whole contagion of hell and opens a vein that bleeds a nation to death, not pulling any punches at all. Let's jump forward to John Jay. Here he is writing, I'm not sure who this went to, May 29, 1793, a very similar view. He says, an unjust war is among the greatest of evils, and for this and numerous other reasons, because the blood and misery caused by it must rest on the heads of those who wage it. About a decade earlier, here's John Jay again in a letter to Gouverneur Morris, September of 1783. He says, while there are knaves, and again, this is just shortly after the Treaty of Paris was signed, so there was new peace officially. He says, while there are knaves and fools in the world, there will be wars in it. Just one quick comment. He's recognizing that bad people want war, and fools, well, they'll foolishly follow those knaves into war and destruction. He says, while there are knaves and fools in the world, there will be wars in it. And that nations should make war against nations is less surprising than their living in uninterrupted peace and harmony. And speaking of peace, Benjamin Franklin was a longtime advocate for peace. Now, mind you, I'm wearing kind of a replica print of his join or die design on a shirt. He actually made that, I think it was 1754. This is at the outset of the French and Indian War, the French-Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. He was calling for unity against the French. So I think he took a very similar approach, but he certainly was fully on board with peace. Here he is writing to Josiah Quincy Sr., September 11, 1783, 8 days after he personally signed, he was the guy signing, well, one of three, signing the Treaty of Paris, officially creating the end of the war with Great Britain. And here's how he put it. He says, there never was a good war or a bad peace. Never was a good war. Even when you needed it, even when it was justifiable, it still had horrible results, according to Benjamin Franklin and many others. And here he is a couple years earlier in a letter to John Adams, October 1781. He says, I have never known a peace made, even the most advantageous, that was not censured as inadequate. We hear these types of things all the time. No matter what, whenever there's peace, people will tell us it's dangerous, it's bad, you're giving up too much, whatever it may be. And he recognized that that's how it always has been, and it still is that way today. He says, the makers are also condemned as injudicious or corrupt. And then he says, blessed are the peacemakers. Remember that phrase? Blessed are the peacemakers is, I suppose, to be understood in the other world. For in this they are more frequently cursed. And he highlighted the word cursed. So peacemakers, Thomas Jefferson, I think we should cite at this point. And here he is writing also to John Adams in April of 1794. He says, I confess to you, I have seen enough of one war never to wish to see another. It's those who have gone through the horrors of things like this that I think are the most adamant to be opposed to it. Unless, of course, they have something to gain, if they're a knave or a fool, for example, as John Jay had to put it. And here he is again, Jefferson again, just a week or so later, May of 1794, in a letter to Tench Coxe. He says, as to myself, I love peace. I mean, he's not holding back at all. He's not trying to beat around the bush. As to myself, I love peace, and I am anxious that we should give the world still another useful lesson by showing to them other modes of punishing injuries than by war, which is as much a punishment to the punisher as to the sufferer. That's Thomas Jefferson at Tench Coxe, May of 1794. Here's James Madison, who I often cite on the nature of war powers under the Constitution, but here he is in a paper called Universal Peace, published in January 1792 in the National Gazette. He's talking about the goal of creating a universal peace for all time. And he says, That's probably not really going to happen. He says, it is still, however, true that war contains so much folly as well as wickedness that much is to be hoped from the progress of reason, and if anything is to be hoped, everything ought to be tried for universal peace. Of course, I will link to this along with everything else in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. I do encourage you to read Madison's as well. And here's Madison one more time. This is a part of a quote that I've used many, many times talking about war powers under the Constitution. He's writing in Political Observations, another paper that he wrote, April of 1795, and you'll probably recognize this first part. Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded, because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. That's the part that I've often cited. But thanks to one of our short Meharry Minute videos, Mike Meharry cited another part of it recently, and he got me thinking to do this whole episode, really. And Madison went further. He said the same malignant aspect in republicanism may be traced in the inequality of fortunes and the opportunities of fraud growing out of a state of war. It doesn't matter what form of government. When you're in a state of war, you're going to have inequality, opportunities of fraud that show up that really wouldn't have been there without it. And he said, and in the degeneracy of manners and of morals engendered by both. War leads to degeneracy of manners and morals. And he sums it up by saying, no nation, not some, not many, not once in a while, no nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. And one other just kind of a bonus quote here. This is from a pastor, Simeon Howard. This was from a sermon preached to the, quote, ancient and honorable artillery company in Boston in 1773. And he puts it this way, and he's talking about how we know that, well, there are defensive wars, but you can't just, once you've gotten into a defensive war, you can't just let it keep going forever, which is what we see happen today. And here's how Simeon put it. After a people have been forced into war for their own security, they ought to set reasonable bounds to their resentment, or they may become as guilty as the first aggressors. Even if you get into a war for defensive means, if you don't end it once you're done defending yourself, then at some point you are just as guilty as the people who committed the first aggression. He said they should aim at nothing more than repelling the injury, obtaining reparation for damages sustained, and security against future injuries. If, after these ends are obtained, they continue the war in order to distress their enemies or reduce them under their power, they become offenders, and the war on their side is unjust. Powerful stuff all around here. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it was educational more than anything. I hope you learned something and are encouraged to check out these links, which I'll include in the show notes, and read more on your own time. Of course, if you like the show, you like our work, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, subscribing or getting notifications on any of the video platforms, smashing the like button. All that stuff triggers algorithms, and it tells those platforms to show the program to more people, and it really helps a lot. But nothing helps us more than the financial faith of our members. You can join us today for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you enjoy the work that we're doing. I hope you have a great weekend coming up ahead, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.